committee members being present, I call the Monday, January 6th meeting of the Park and Rec Committee to order. And the first order of business would be public comment or suggestions, and if persons want to wait until immediately before the Riverside Park soil testing topic, they can do that, or they can come up now, or whatever. Want to wait? Want to go now? Whatever works.
Good afternoon. May I leverage my citizen time for these 3 minutes and use my time as a presenter for the agenda item?
I suppose.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Tom Killian, 133 East Thomas Street. On November 21st, the city received this responsible party letter. It was sent just 3 weeks after the DNR received dioxin soil results. Now, when it received this letter, it was simply very shortly after the Wausau air deposition results came in. And when we look at the past results, okay, that we see that those are much higher than the results for which the city received the RP letter. So with the results for the RP letter that the city has to investigate and clean up, the TEQ value range between 22 and 62 roughly. Now those were far lower than the sample results by and in Riverside Park that the DNR and the city had for years. 11 years later, and there's still been no substantial action on those. So that dioxin TEQ of 62, let's compare it with the past historical levels. Now those dioxin TEQ levels were 87 and 105 roughly, 40% higher than this year's results. Now what regulatory action has the community gotten for the neighborhood on those results? Really none. And it was the DNR that ran those numbers, listing the TEQ and the exceedances from the past. Now that was done in March of 2018, and essentially nothing was done. So I want to just be very clear, and it will come up later tonight, that we desire, and I think a lot of the community desires, that state soil standards are enforced consistently, particularly when environmental justice populations are involved. And there is nothing reasonable or logical, nothing just or acceptable about taking enforcement action on lower levels, but ignoring dramatically higher levels for years. And I think that even if it's well intended, the city can get get away with a lot more with the DNR's enforcement discretion than perhaps it can get away with in the community's eyes. So what I want to sum up is that with this RP letter, lower levels, no toxicology intervention, and a DNR responsible party letter. But with higher levels, multiple toxicology interventions, there has been no action at all, and that appears to be irrational and unacceptable. Thank you.
Anybody else like to address the committee before we start the business portion? Very good. All had a chance to look at the minutes from our December 2 meeting. Any issues, corrections? Applause. Motion to approve.
Move to approve, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Have a second. Thank you, Mr. Neal. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Thank you very much. Going to go right into the meat of the evening, the Riverside Park soil testing. And Mr. Killian, if you'd like to kick us off for that, then I would like to hear a little, background and any reaction to that from Mr. Lindman, and then the committee can start wrestling with this.
Thank you. And as to not be redundant and to make this useful, if there's any kind of questions or particular information the committee would desire, please let me know. So we could start with these recent soil samples in the park. Now, those were not taken where the 2006 samples were taken. Those were taken slightly east in the, you could call it a main area of the park, east of the forest. Now, what's, I think, insightful about these is Wausau had done one sample in the park. Now, that was much farther north in the park, and I've got that. I believe the sample number was 010. And that level came back at roughly 3.5 parts per trillion. Using the level that Dr. Zhang identified for our tests, farther south in the park by the runoff area we anticipated where there would be higher levels, that was 21 parts per trillion, roughly, the dioxin TEQ. So just in a limited sampling event, 3 samples, we were able to identify that the areas farther south of Wausau's sample were over 5 times higher than their TEQ level. So I think, one, that is a good indication of where we could start delineating potentially higher levels of soil. The northern area of the park clearly does not have the levels, the southern area of the park, and I would guess that through some limited cost-effective testing, we could also see that the kind of problem area is probably in that runoff zone, not farther east by the river or the walkway. I think it would be possible to cost-effectively delineate this. And then if you look in your packet at the map, and I don't know offhand what page that is on from the, Mr. Peckham has it, what you will see, and I'll say again, this was a limited sampling event, but it's very interesting. You'll note that RP 102, the levels there were substantially higher than RP 101 and RP 103. Now, what is anecdotally interesting about the location of RP 102 is that is at the base of where the culvert would drain into the park, where the other 2 are not. So I think that also helps in garnering some insight from those tests. And based on all the results, Mr. Peckham, as I mentioned in the email, just have some brief points on what we'd like to see occur. But if you have any questions on the data first.
I don't have any questions on the data.
Okay. So what we'd like to see occur, and I believe you'll find these very customary, nothing special. We want to see, one, that consistent DNR enforcement of state soil standards. Now, these are codified. You can Google it. The media can Google it. The state has soil cleanup standards. That's chapter NR 720. You can find them on the Wisconsin legislature website. Now, those have been codified. It bakes in a lifetime cancer risk level, and we want those standards enforced in our neighborhood because they typically are enforced everywhere else in the city without a toxicological intervention. That tends to be irrelevant when state soil standards are enforced. Now, given what was stated earlier, we would like to see a delineation of the area that exceeds state soil standards. Now, with the amount of testing that's been done this far, we've really come to be able to focus on a runoff zone that starts with a culvert inlet and outfall, and at the base of the park. It's a rather defined area of the park. And we'd like to see enough testing where it can be delineated, hey, this is the area that exceeds state soil standards if it currently does. And if the area exceeds state soil standards, we'd like to see what's very conventional, and that would be that soil which exceeds is either excavated or capped. I believe Mr. Lindman had mentioned in a recent WSAU article about the exceedances in the rail corridor that one could probably excavate down to I'll let Mr. Lindman specify, but I believe it was a 10 to 12 inch level, and that would probably be sufficient. So I think something like that could be effective and cost effective. And I think it would be positive if the city, the DNR, and the community would have a chance to collaborate and discuss what a potential soil cleanup standard level would be. And lastly, if that is done, a simple barrier implemented to prevent further flow of stormwater runoff from areas on the western side of the park into the area of the park east of the forest or tree line. So essentially, if there was an area that exceeded, it was dealt with, something simple and cost-effective was put in place to prevent further stormwater runoff from recontaminating that area. And that, I think, that would be reasonable, logical, and I think what would often be done in this type of scenario. So we just like to see that with the responsible party the city got in the other area, that really it's consistent, and that would be just implemented in this area of the park.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I have a question, maybe.
Very good.
Hang up there, maybe.
Oh, yes.
So, RP 102, you say, it's below like a culvert. Would this indicate to us that, the RP letter is based on results on aerial deposition testing, correct?
I believe Sand Creek just labeled it RP for the Riverside Park on those.
Yeah, but as a result probably of aerial, it was a study of aerial deposition, correct?
The Wausau study was, and that was the sample
Right.
010, up higher.
Now, we've got a culvert that might be funneling down to RP 102, not so much 103 or 101, right? Which to me might indicate more of a concentrated source on the west side of the park, outside of the park probably. I'm worried about capping if that provides like a non-permeable surface for runoff to just keep running off over. What have we
Yes.
accomplished? And then when you talk about having a barrier of some sort, well, we're probably talking about some kind of retention pond, or is it detention pond? I forget. But that would probably have to be located off of city property, do you think?
Well, I think with the barrier, and the DNR could perhaps speak to this, it can be as simple, I believe, as like an asphalt cap, something of that nature. But I think to your point about concerns about runoff, I think that makes sense. And I have to be careful, I'm just a layperson, but I think also what you pointed out is it might indicate a source. What the current narrative seems to be is that, hey, these may have come from railroad ties. And I think your point was kind of pretty insightful, that these are all east of a railroad track downhill, all about equidistant from the railroad track. So as a layperson, just common sense, I'd expect more uniform levels.
Exactly. That's what I'm
yeah,
thinking.
Yep.
So, there might be some subsurface sourcing or, something in the, I don't know, is that Wausau property immediately to the west there, or what property is that?
Some is S&E Wausau property, and I believe some is 3M property.
Sure,
and-
yeah, it's all blurred lines in
Yes.
my brain. But yeah, it almost seems if there's a culvert, I don't know where it's, we might know where its mouth is on the east side, but where is its entry point on the west side? How far, below surface, or where is that located, and what's funneling to it is pretty important for me to understand.
And may I speak to that briefly, the culvert inlet? And it's something Mr. Peckham and I talked about months ago. The assumption used to be, because that was the highest level, it was 105 according to the DNR, the assumption had been that that was fenced in. And what we found out this summer, a neighbor took us over because he knew where the culvert inlet was, and it's not fenced in, it's just east of the fence. And I think a positive is, and Mr. Lindman could confirm, I think the culvert, very little now passes through that culvert. It's, that retention pond there had kind of taken the place of the culvert years ago. And so I think mainly what we might be dealing with is just residual levels that probably aren't continuing, hopefully, to get much worse.
So if we determine that the levels are beyond what is acceptable, then we're talking about remediation of not catastrophic levels.
I mean, from looking at, that's what we feel, is that this would be a fairly defined area, because, even that RP 102, there were no individual exceedances, the DNR says, but they were very close, on some of the levels. So I think that if there could just be enough testing to kind of define that area, I would be surprised if it was a large area of the park, frankly, but that would just be speculation.
Thank you. I think we need to be a little bit careful not to get too far ahead of ourselves, because we don't have additional test results. But common sense, I agree, would say that at 102 location being immediately downslope from the culvert is as we expected. That's going to be the hot spot, if there is a hot spot. The good news is that it was a quarter of the level of what was right at the base of that culvert outfall, and that was what was found initially to be no unreasonable risk. So we are at a quarter of the level that was found to be no unreasonable risk. It doesn't mean we stop, and I guess before we go too much further, if Mr. Lindman wants to kind of amplify the memo that he provided for us, and I don't know if you can talk about why the DNR gets excited about one number and then doesn't the other number.
Yeah, really, I guess to start out, what the DNR looked at was the actual, that there were residual contaminant exceedances on the testing that Wausau did on the railroad corridor, which was actually southeast of Emter Street, where we're proposing along that wall there, where the railroad still sits. It wasn't so much the TEQ levels, it was the fact that there were each individual coninger that they test for with dioxin and furans, there's a few that exceeded the non-industrial contact levels. And so that's what prompted them to give us the letter in that particular circumstance. So my conversations with Matt Thompson with the DNR, as well as REI, who the city has hired to put together a plan for the DNR for potential testing. The conversations with the DNR was they wanted to see the plan and potential testing all the way up to the 3M property. And so, which sort of makes sense, because at the culvert siting as well, those had higher levels. Along the railroad corridor, we had exceedances. And so trying to figure out and try to delineate out that corridor, is it just a small, narrow corridor that we have to deal with? Or is there something beyond there on the north or south side of that? So that's the process we're in right now. We should have that plan put together here in the next week or two and over to the DNR for their review and consideration. We'll have a chat with them. Preliminary look, we thought maybe additional 6 to 8 tests along that corridor, The exact locations and stuff will be determined through conversations with the DNR, so. But it will go up probably past the culvert area, which is basically right up from 102. So it'll actually be a little bit northwest on the city-owned property, probably butt up against where the 3M property hits right there too, so.
Is it correct, Mr. Lindman, that the contamination along the railroad right-of-way is not necessarily related to anything Wausau, anything that happened on that property? It's more likely from railroad
It seems that.
ties or something like that?
Yeah, it seems that way, you know, the creosote soak, the treated timbers, things like that. I mean, there's no direct link back to S&E or Wausau or anything, you know, because there wasn't a point discharge at that location from that property. There wasn't, you know, so there's really no way to state that there's a direct link from one to the other, and the DNR isn't willing to make that stake, you know, they're not willing to state that there's a direct link, so.
Is there anything that might indicate a direct link to the railroad ties?
No, other than that, these, you know, what I've talked with Clara on and what I've talked with Matt Thompson with is just basically that, you know, dioxins are found around those areas typically at higher levels. So, yeah, you know, that's about the extent of my knowledge on it, just what I've been told.
Mr. Killian made mention to us his, if I'm getting it right, sort of, on the one hand, having the toxicologist's opinion based on, you know, what has transpired here over the last couple of years. And on the other hand, he mentioned state soil standards.
Right.
Do we have, are we at odds here between those two things? Do we have one entity saying everything's fine, everything's, you know, within acceptable limits? Is there another set of standards that might say, whoa, that's not the case? And are we taking that into account?
I think that they look at them a little bit differently, you know, like DHS looks at the direct contact of the levels, you know, that are found. And so then they do an analysis, and I'm not a scientist, so I don't know all the details of that. But it's pretty extensive to determine if there is a cancer risk or if there's a general health risk, you know, to direct contact and what that would be. So far, they said that there isn't. And part of that might be because, you know, you know, they always go back to the fact that you actually have to ingest it, you know, to really build that up in your body. So I think that, you know, with the DNR, they're pretty tight on, is there a residual contaminant level per some of these coningers with the dioxin and furans, right? So this is the non-industrial contact level. If you're below that, the DNR doesn't seem to have a concern. If you're above it, raises a trigger, and we had 3 of them, 3 soil tests, and all 3 had levels above the residual contaminant levels that they set, and so that's what prompted the responsible party letter, because we own the property. Yep. So, and with that, they give it what they call a BERTS number, so it's the actual site number now. Okay, so we have to follow the steps that the DNR poses on us, right? You know, to make sure that everything's documented. We put the plan in place, and then we execute the plan that's approved by the DNR with their feedback, and then when those tests come back, we have the report write-up and stuff. They review that, determine if there's additional testing required, if they need more information, and those types of things, so.
So you're talking about the area southeast of Emter Street?
Right, but we will be, my conversations with Matt, we don't have the plan in place yet, but he did say that they would be wanting additional testing up to the 3M property, which
On
would
those,
put us
at
up.
those 3 indicated sites, particularly
Yeah, but
102?
I think right now they're looking at more on the top of the hill, you know, or maybe down the hill just a little bit. Because what they want to do is they want to determine, they know at the culvert, you know, we have higher levels. They know kind of on the southeast of Emter, they have levels. We know what the levels are in Riverside Park at this point. So they want to try to delineate out where, and from their standpoint, it's really where the contaminant levels are exceeded. you know? So what, because I think at some point, they're gonna tell us that, hey, look, these are the contaminant levels, these are the areas that's exceeded, and so this is what we want you to do, you know? So, and then we'll have to take that course of action.
One of the things in the DNR's letter that caught my eye was that the wording on one of the things, and it said that we find essentially it said, we find the city responsible for the discharge of contamination or whatever along that right of way. And what they're saying is, we're responsible for what to do about it now, but we didn't put it there. I mean,
Correct.
we are not responsible for the act of it being discharged.
Correct.
It's our baby now.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay. Mr. Smith?
This railroad property, we keep on talking about it. Is that an abandoned right-of-way that somehow we acquired?
Yeah, it was actually an abandoned railroad, and I actually don't know that the railroad ever owned it. It's a little vague on the history of it, but it looks like it was leased at some point, you know? And then it was just transferred back, and most of it went back to the city. And it shows up in our mapping now as part of the park.
Okay. This plan we're putting together for this railroad property, is that going to have any way of addressing any of the concerns of Mr. Killian? Is that related? Are they two separate instances or so?
No, I would say that they're related. I mean, from what I saw or heard what Tom was saying is that, you know, the citizens group is concerned about that area up by Riverside Park, and the DNR wants us to take a look at putting the plan together, which would include, you know, not just that area where we had those exceedances from the Wausau testing, but to go beyond Emter Street to the northwest, all the way up to the 3M property. So
Okay.
I think there will be some, actually, I'm confident that there'll be some testing up in that area, and the exact location should be determined.
My understanding is that in order to satisfy the DNR for the responsible party matter, we don't need to go into the park, but this committee could choose to ask to have some testing done at the park at the same time, and then we get all the results at once.
Right, I mean, the committee could ask, you know.
So
us
if you
to
put
take look
together a
at testing.
plan regarding the
Right.
railroad right-of-way, it might not get into the park.
Right.
Unless we ask for that to happen.
Technically, that whole area is classified as Riverside Park, but you're talking down below, like where they tested along the base of the bank, actually in the open space
Where
down there.
people would recreate.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
anticipate us needing to go that far.
Okay.
Based on what the DNR,
So if you did go that far, it would be because this committee requested that addition.
yes.
Okay.
I have had no indication from the DNR that they're gonna ask us to go, that far to the north.
Very good. Does that clarify that for you, Dennis?
Well, I'm still confused. I think we've already determined with the test conducted by the citizens group that there is contaminants there. I guess what we're trying to determine now is where it's coming from. I think we probably realize it's coming from upstream. I just want to know if the citizens group has given us a very clear direction as to what they would like to see done. I guess our decision now is if we're going to, you know, follow up on that, or if we don't feel it's necessary, or what's going to go on. I'd like to reach a decision on this. This has been going on a long time, and I'd like to move forward on this and get a commitment from the committee to say, okay, we're going to take your suggestions, and that's what we're going to do. And but if we do that, then you should be comfortable the understanding that you're going to have to live with whatever we get once we do this. You know. So I guess I'd ask Mr. Killian to come back up and ask him if what we've discussed so far is any way alleviates some of his concern.
Thank you. Yes, I think what Mr. Lindman said about the upper elevation, we would want to see tests there because they seem to be higher in those areas, but we would also want to see where potential runoff would have landed in the park. So it sounds like that may not be currently included in the plan the DNR is requiring of the city. So we would want to see that. And just for clarification, when Mr. Lindman talked about individual exceedances and the DNR's concern with those, in March of 2018, they had run the numbers, the park numbers, and there were multiple individual exceedances in those past results. It's kind of an enigma here and in the neighborhood why no action was taken. Rather bizarre, but just to confirm, there were specific individual exceedances.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Neal?
Yeah, Mr. Killian, RP 102, now that is at the base of the hill, right?
Yes, it is.
Is that near that area that, we saw the photo of that kind of muddy runoff on top of the ground?
It is, I believe, east, just east of that area, and those pictures of stormwater runoff were just a little bit.
That might just be that kind of light area to the left of the
Yeah,
triangle?
it would be a little northwest of there, Mr. Neal.
Okay.
And may I inject something that may be useful for the committee, just based on what was talked about with no point source release? So we know there's a culvert there, and I think one question that hopefully the city and the community, we could stand together and we could ask the DNR, we could ask Waleco and, Century Insurance, obviously. In the Stantec report, it may have referenced using penta potentially as a dust suppressant, during the Crestline S&E operations. I think we need to reach out to Waleco and Century, even if some of these documents may be sealed, and ask them as a matter of good faith if they will provide those, if they exist. And then also, something that doesn't quite add up is, there seems to be some issues with that former lawsuit that don't quite jive with the narrative we're hearing that there wasn't some sort of dioxin exposure in the neighborhood. So I believe a lot of these settlements are sealed, but I'd also like to ask and see if maybe they'll just do it as an act of community. Did they ever excavate or cap any residential yards in the neighborhood? And please provide the address if so. Because if it's from the railroad tracks and they were excavating on the southern side of Thomas Street as part of a settlement, that would sure be something, right? That wouldn't fit with the current narrative. So I think before we go with, hey, we've got a railroad issue and the city's got a plan with the DNR, I think we should at least, dot the i's and cross the t's on some things that may conflict.
Thank you. Mr. Larson, do you have something to contribute?
I do, and thank you, Dennis Smith, for saying what you did, because you kind of sort of answered my question, and that was, what kind of time frame can you offer us citizens here of when all this stuff is going to be done? I mean, obviously, you've got a culvert that's leaking contaminants in the park. What kind of time frame can you give us that this is going to be capped or sealed or do whatever you do and excavate or do whatever you need to do to the soil? And that's what I would like to know. What kind of time frame can you give us?
I think we're going to find out the time frame as soon as we, I think the committee is bending toward requesting additional testing, so we know that. But one thing I would like to react to, Mr. Larson, is your statement that the culvert is leaking contaminants into the park, and we don't know that that's happening now. We know it happened in the past, and it would be good to find out if it's continuing. We want to know, but we don't have any evidence that it's continuing to contribute to a problem. Mr. Nutting.
Yes, I had an opportunity to look at that culvert when we went there this past summer, and visually the evidence is that there's nothing new exiting from that culvert because it was quite grown over and no visual evidence of flow. It appears that at that point that whatever its source was from has been stopped from up above. It's also quite likely that where this dusty-looking soil was could be associated with a low spot where rainwater pools and has during our heavier rain times, and then whatever is in that rainwater just settles down and becomes dusty-looking as it's drying off. But I was wondering a question from Mr. Lindman with regards to the railroad area there from Thomas Street going northwest following that rail bed. Is it potentially possible that that area is a future River's Edge walkway bicycling area that could be remediated by simply capping it with a certain layer, and then that part of the River's Edge Trail would be accommodated through there, and that would be potentially the aspect of it, of raising the level of the park area with a new cap level, and as we've done in other brownfield areas along the city's River's Edge
Right.
east side.
Yeah, I mean, I think like what we're in the design phase of right now on rebuilding that wall that's failing along the river and then establishing a trail
Yep.
up on the top of that. You know, a lot of that soil and the railroad bed and stuff, all that has to come up anyway. So, you know, the thought process is, talking with the DNR is that if there is some sort of remedial action that the city has to take at some point, probably the most cost-effective way is to actually remove the soil from that area, because we're talking probably about that top 1 foot. We may even have to remove more if there's a lot of organics to actually establish the trail and build it back up, but
Is the track still there?
yes, in some areas there, it's still there. Yep, along with the ties and stuff as well.
Right.
Yep.
I thought that it was acceptable to simply cap that with a higher level
you can.
rather than excavating and disturbing it.
Right, yep, that's it, that's a resolution if you're not going to do anything in that area, is you could come in, either put soil on it or something, to a certain depth,
Or as-
and cap it.
Or asphalt as a
Correct.
parking area
Asphalt
that was
could be another one.
utilized in other
Yes.
areas.
Yes.
Which would be a trail.
That's correct, yep,
Thank you for the clarification.
yep.
Ms. Killian, do you have something?
My name is Terry Killian. I reside at 133 East Thomas Street. When Mr. Lindman was talking about the toxicologists, and we've heard repeatedly that we shouldn't eat the dirt, we should wash our hands when we're in the park. But because we had access to public records at the courthouse from the lawsuit in 2012, we have a list of well over 100 people from that small area who have cancer, who have serious, serious illnesses. I just spoke with a gentleman 2 days ago who was raised, his family lived on River Street. His whole family had cancer, and his sister just died. My neighbor just died of cancer a year and a half ago, and a lady up the street just developed pancreatic cancer. So when I hear that we shouldn't eat too much dirt, or the kids shouldn't eat too much dirt, and we should wash our hands, it just creates a physical reaction in me, and my heart just pounds, because I know in my heart that what has happened in that area is far more serious than we are dealing with.
Thank you. I think we can start our discussion of what we want to do at this point. I think, and the committee can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we are pretty much in agreement with Mr. Killian's first point, and that is to emphasize the southern area of the park where, we're seeing here. Is that right? Okay. And he asked if he would like to see a consistent DNR enforcement community-wide, and I don't know if that's in the purview of the committee to make that request of the DNR, or if individuals should say, hey, why is this inconsistent?
Well, I think we could certainly ask somebody from the DNR to come and explain their position to us. I don't think that's an unreasonable request.
Okay, is that a motion?
Yes.
Very good. Second? Mr. Nutting? Mr. Neal?
But again, when we talk about our purview and possible concerns about, a wider area of concern and whatnot, and community standards and all that, is this something that we would invite such person, like to the Public Health and Safety Committee instead than a Parks and Rec Committee? Because all we're talking about is the park.
Right.
And we can't really be making recommendations beyond that. It's not coming from our area of purview, so.
That's a good point. We could also just ask the DNR if they would react to the question of, it looks like you're getting excited about a number here that is actually lower than a number that didn't trip your trigger. Mr. Gisselman.
Well, just speaking to the point about the larger community, I think that last year we were heavily involved as a committee of the whole. I think that that's where we began this community discussion, and nothing as much happens, nothing, in fact, nothing has happened with reports back from the DNR or whoever. So I think, speaking to the larger issue, I think a call from the committee of the whole, the chairperson of the city council and the mayor's office to in fact initiate that. I think that's where it has belonged, that's where it has sat in the past, and I think that's where it should be sitting if we go forward with that issue.
How would you feel about a request just coming from the mayor?
Well, the mayor can certainly call for a committee of the whole with regard to.
Or he could just call contact the DNR and say, could you make a give us a statement on this?
Well, I think Mr. Smith is saying that indeed we want to hear from the DNR.
Yes.
I think that individually, members of the city council may want to address the DNR and exactly ask them what the current situation is. I think that we had that meeting with the DNR, with the committee of the whole. It was sort of promised off and on that was going to happen, and it never did. I'm just here through April, but I certainly would think that that's something that I would like to see yet before my tenure ends. And I think that we should encourage either the chairperson of the city council or the mayor's office to initiate that. I think Mr. Smith is right on, and I think we have a lot of questions that we can find out from the DNR, and I look forward to that.
You would like to, as the motion suggests, you would like to have a DNR representative here?
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments on that motion? Pardon?
For a cow.
You want it for, okay, that one, in what forum would you like to have that take place?
Well, I think it would be best if we had it before a committee of the whole. We have everybody here.
Okay, so the motion is to request a committee of the whole meeting where a DNR representative would speak to us about the apparent inconsistency in action with the various test results.
Yes.
Okay, is that okay with a second? Okay, any other comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, motion carries unanimously. That will start the wheel.
I'd ask Mr. Killian, does that seem to be moving in the right direction to find out exactly what's going on here?
Yes, I believe it does, and asking for the DNR, from the DNR for, a reasonable explanation of why there's such inconsistency. I think we're going to have to realize there is no reasonable explanation. So we're going to be very objective and guarded with the DNR. We have great respect for several people there, but we're also well-versed in their history on this neighborhood matter, and historically, it's very poor. But I think this is a good step in the right direction.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And then Mr. Killian next asked that we attempt to delineate the area where soil contamination may exceed state standards. And one way to do that would be testing. So I think at this point, we either decide that we don't need to know any more about testing in the broader area where people are going to recreate, or we would like some more testing. If we would like some more testing, the timing would be appropriate to add a number of tests of our choosing to the testing that's being mandated for the railroad right-of-way. So it wouldn't be part of that response, but it would be added onto it, and we could look at it separately. Mr. Nutting?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would guess, being as Mr. Killian alluded to himself, I would agree, and myself as a layperson, asking for those who have expertise in this, and my first person to go for expertise would be Mr. Lindman, as to what his recommendation would be as our professional on staff, and the timing of that. And would you make that suggestion, sir, after further reports that we are to get soon? And would some of that take place, in your estimation, in May, June, et cetera?
Yeah, I think I think the plan is, we have to have the plan in by mid-January. I'm sure it'll be 30 days or so before the DNR and it gets finalized, and then we'll probably end up bidding out the soil testing, and then that'll probably take place in the spring. But, we're happy to bring up some additional locations in the other area, but I wouldn't want to just guess right now on where that would be.
Are locations necessary, or should a capping procedure take place, or?
Well, I think we should follow the DNR's procedure, and so their protocols and work with them, if the committee, wants to do additional testing based on the citizens group and their request, I can certainly bring that up to the DNR, but I'd bring it up to our environmental consultant and the DNR, and,
Right.
They're kind of the experts in this area.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Neal?
Thanks. Yeah, when I look at this area, from RP 103 through 101, and the park land to the east of it, I see an area that sure would like to have some sort of a map overlay, like with a gradiated, footprint showing, delineating what are we talking about? Because right now I see 3 points. What I don't see is an expanse, and it's hot here and it's cool there, and this is how it, gradiates, so I would like some kind of, something beyond that tells me, what's the situation there.
Yeah, I guess right now, there's just, from the opinion on our side is that there's no reason to do additional testing on the lower part, because there were no exceedances at this point, There's nothing that indicates that there's a health impact or a health hazard down there, and that's what the
Well,
DNR.
that would be a good,
Right.
a good thing to see illustrated. But still, maybe, that wooded kind of hilly area.
Correct.
Maybe that is outlined as the area of concern, and it's gradiated from, hot to cold or whatever.
Sure.
Let's isolate, specifically the square footage we're talking about here.
Right, and I think, those are the conversations we'll have with the plan, so we should have, I'm guessing it's gonna end up being like an oval shaped, on the areas of potential concern, and then if we find some more with the testing that we're gonna do, that may result in additional testing or outreach, yeah.
Do you have a motion from the committee to do additional testing in Riverside Park in conjunction or, as part of the same testing that's being done in the railroad corridor?
I would welcome and make that motion.
Okay,
second.
would you like to specify your second? Thank you. Would you like to specify how many you want? Okay, when we were at the park, my suggestion was that we kind of, from the culvert area, go out 50 feet or so and do 2, and then go out another 50 feet or so and do 3. So we would have done 5 under that scenario. I have had a brief conversation with Mr. Lindman, and we agree that we should stay clear of the asphalt walkway, because then we're going to get junk from the asphalt that is going to throw our results off. So I think we should go out into the area where people are likely to come in contact with the soil, and stop there. Pardon?
I think, you know, when we're looking for dioxins and we're taking a look at these things, you kind of want to go in areas that are maybe a little less disturbed, okay? So, you know, we can take a look at going in the park maybe a little bit further north. If you want one or two in the base part of the park, that's fine too. You know, but I can get the opinions from the others as well.
I think what we need to do is establish the perimeter. Where is it not a problem and where it's a problem? I don't know if we start a little bit further out, do some tests. If those are clean, that's fine. We come back in a little further. If those are clean, that's fine. Then we know those areas out there are clean. And so I don't, and eventually we should get to an area where we're going to find some contamination. And once we have that, we know that either we have to cap this, but everything out there is good. I think really we've got a very small area that we're going to have to deal with here. We just have to find out where that area is and then deal with it.
I think one of the things that I think we should keep in mind is that, and I really don't want to drag this out any more than we need to, but if we do 3 to 5 tests down there and our questions are not answered or it doesn't become clear, you know, that there's some pattern of drop-off and contamination or something like that, we can say, okay, looks like we need 3 more tests to the right of that or something. I would like to do the tests, figure out what we're doing, and wrap this up as a departure present for our retiring senior statesman over there.
Well, Mr. Smith is also
Yeah, but-
retiring.
Yes,
But I'm just a young kid.
yeah.
Thank you very much. for that.
He's a rookie.
So, well, we can just say the limit, you know, say 5, and that, I think a motion, was there not a motion made? And
Well, I didn't have a number in my motion, and I don't really feel my motion requires a number. I really think that between Mr. Lindman's input and you talking with him, that number, you know, and where those things are going to be placed is something that you can just come to. I mean, to me, it's like, just to say 5 is like a magic number, or it's not, you know. It could be 3 is wonderful, could be 4 is perfect, I don't know. So that's not part
We're
of the
going to
motion.
need, Ms. Polly just reminded me that we're going to need to request funding for this somewhere, so I think we need
Well, this would be tacked on to the effort southeast of Emter Street, right? This would be an adjunct to that effort, just widening the net, am I right?
Correct. And so it just, you know, I don't know if there'd be additional cost in the plan for that. I
Or
don't
do you
think there
rob
would
from
be.
Peter to pay Paul, and, you know, do a little less here, a little more there?
I
or-
think it just matters on, you know, the cost and the procurement policy. I don't think adding a few more tests, because we're going to bid out the tests anyway, so,
Okay.
the actual work, so, yep.
I think in order for whoever needs to approve this to know, I think they need to know that, you know, no more than 5 tests at a cost of X.
We don't know that until we get a response to the request for bids.
I think if you're comfortable with it, I'll work with the DNR and the environmental experts in our in-house, and we'll come up with the locations that seem to be best, and if that's 2 or 5 or whatever it is.
Okay, and you're hearing basically what, from the conversations
Yes.
we've had, you know where we're going with this.
Yeah, so you want additional testing in the general park area, the more open area.
Yeah.
Once you determine that, can you bring it back to us so we can take a look and say, okay, that's,
Sure.
you'll have it marked, and then we can get input from the citizens group too, if they're comfortable with that, because I'd like to keep them in the loop on this.
Is that going
And,
to slow us down? I'd like to get this done. Okay.
No.
Okay, so you will bring a proposal back to us, here's what we're thinking about doing for our next meeting.
Right.
Okay. Mr. Killian, you got one more?
Very briefly, and thank you for considering more testing. I just wanted to interject, if possible, in this set of samples that you do, because we know where the highest levels were, we'd like to have those areas retested at a surface level and then at the base of the A horizon in the soil, because that is where those exceedances were found. And that would, I think, we'd think that would be a very good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion to request the preparation of a proposal for testing, I guess, in that area to be done in conjunction with the testing that's going to be ordered along the railroad corridor. Any other comments? All those in favor of said motion, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion is unanimous. Thank you. And Mr. Killian had other points about delineating the area, what we do after we've gotten the lab tested, and we can't, that's not something we can control today. So, anything else on that topic, committee? Okay, thank you. So we go to number 5, discussion and possible action reviewing department usage of chemicals where needed on the city property, and Ms. Polly can introduce our resident expert on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I got to turn on my thing. Thank you. Tonight, we are bringing this forward to you as a request from the last meeting from committee members to hear about our practice of using chemicals on city property, when we do it, why we do it, when we don't do it. And so tonight, I have Greg Fricks here tonight. He's our Assistant Director of Operations to talk to you about where we use it, when we use it. I handed out in the beginning of the meeting a little talking points item that he's going to go through for your reference, and then he's here to answer any questions. So, Mr. Fricks.
Thank you. So if you have a chance to read through the overview that we put together for you, we obviously manage a number of diverse areas. Whenever the decision to use products, if you will, that's not just the only thing that's thought about. It's part of a site management plan, and it's based on other variables, whatever we think is pertinent to give us the best end result. We do always take into consideration the program of integrated pest management, and we utilize part of integrated pest management procedures is utilizing cultural techniques, and many of our people are schooled in a lot of the different areas, whether it's forestry or horticulture or just general maintenance of landscape areas, and that's predominantly what we're talking about here today. So in other words, the decision to use chemical products, it's part of a larger plan. But I do want to emphasize that when we do get to that decision-making process of using some of these products, they become tools that we do rely on just because of efficiencies and, when we do get to that level. So obviously, in many cases, if good cultural practices are used, we don't need to use as many products. A great example would be if we can keep turf healthy and through core aeration and overseeding practices, slit seeding, then, the turf grass is healthy and vibrant and thick, and we don't have as many weed seeds invading that particular turf area. So it's a combination of many different things. So again, we do follow best management practices, not just through integrated pest management, but also policies and laws as defined through the use of products and cultural practices through the EPA, the DNR, and the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. Okay? So just so you have an idea of the areas we do currently use products of any nature, Obviously, our sports fields, we've been held to a pretty high standard. Going forward, like the baseball and softball complexes of today, people want to see good, healthy, quality turf. And those also provide safer playing conditions for our athletes. So those would include areas like Athletic Park, East Bay Sports Complex, Sunnyvale Softball Complex in the county, Brockmeyer Park, we have soccer fields, and baseball diamonds. Then we have designated either internally or externally from our customers, high-quality turf area like the 400 block and around the perimeter here at City Hall. We do have our own internal greenhouse. We grow and propagate plants for downtown shrub beds, and you've probably seen the hanging baskets. Everyone is very familiar with that. And then just in general, our horticulture program for woody ornamentals and things of that nature. We obviously oversee the urban forestry program through our department. We have approximately 27,000 street trees. Very limited use of insecticides or pesticides, but we do use some, and we'll get into that shortly. Invasive species control. I mean, for example, the current thing we've been talking about has been Barker Stewart Island. Everyone is familiar with the buckthorn invasion out there. We do use chemicals after mechanical vegetation removal. Again, it's just another tool in our toolbox. Non-hardscaped trails. We will use, probably the best one to come to mind would be the Mountain Bay Trail, which is under our management. We do try to use, again, cultural practice. It could be grading procedures, but if we want to have a long-term solution to vegetation control, sometimes the best way to accomplish that, it would be through the use of potentially some chemicals. And then we do occasionally use them in general parklands. An example of that would be around trees to prevent mower or weed whip damage. Could be fence lines, could be just the cracks in the parking lots. But just for transparency, we do occasionally use those for spot treatments. I gave you down below that is a summary of some of the products that we do use. We do use fungicides, we do use herbicides. I don't need to get into any of those real specifics unless you have questions. We do use insecticides, but that's probably the least amount of chemical control that we do use. Fertilizers, that's probably the thing that we most monitor, if you will. We do adhere to Wisconsin DNR Natural Resource 151 administrative rule, and that was enacted several years ago to control and mitigate runoff pollution and protect groundwater. And specifically any nutrients that could work their way to groundwater. And if there is one particular nutrient in it, that would be phosphorus. So everyone here has probably fertilized their own lawn perhaps at one time or another. You see there's 3 nutrients listed on every bag of fertilizer. It's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And phosphorus has been deemed the one suspect that potentially can harm our groundwater the most. So wherever we do have fertilizer applications in any significant form, all of our sites, we are under a management plan. We have soil tests taken for all of those individual sites. We write up a plan based on the amount of phosphorus we feel we need to keep the turf, if you will, at a very healthy level. And we keep records on all of the products that are used to perform those operations, and we do keep those records for several years. A few miscellaneous products. But one thing I would like to know that all of the products that we do use are labeled as general use, so predominantly they're the same products that anyone in this room or any homeowner could buy themselves over the counter. Versus what would be deemed restricted use chemicals, so they're not as harmful for the person using them and or the environment. All of our staff that routinely use chemicals, we have requested that all of them complete the Department of Agriculture Trade and consumer protection pesticide applicator training program and certification. It's not something that is mandated, but we seem to want to hold ourselves and our employees to a little bit higher standard, if you will. Along with that training there's a lot of good educational materials that they learn, and integrated pest management is one of those things. We make sure people are using personal protective equipment. We make sure that we follow all safety procedures for not only our staff, but for general public. If there's persons or customers around, we might just stop an application or wait for another day, or if the weather conditions are not appropriate for that particular treatment. We try to provide as much transparency. We get any requests for information, and we provide that immediately. And any of our larger sites that require posting, we do post all of that, and we keep those placards out for 24, 48 hours. And we have made it a policy, an internal policy. We do not use any chemicals near any playground or the skinned areas of sports fields. We've just chosen to mechanically take care of those particular areas. So, any questions on that?
The other thing I would add before I take questions would be that similar, I think you actually went into more depth with the Sustainability, Energy, and Environment Committee. The only reaction that group had was to request to make sure that ultimate care was taken when applying chemicals near waterways, and that was the only thing that anybody was concerned about. Why don't we hear from you, and then we'll go to the committee?
Thank you. Judith Miller, 903 Kickbush Street. We met at the Sustainability Committee meeting. Yes.
Aye.
I'm going to bring this up again. You do use Roundup, correct?
That is correct. We use glyphosate.
Right, which comes, I realize comes as a powder, you dilute it, you spray it. My concern here, because you answered my question at that committee, that people using it only wear gloves. That may be the directive, but I'm sure if you watch TV, you've seen all the class action suits relating to glyphosate and what it can cause, the cancers and the contact, et cetera, and the inhalation of it. My concern is primarily with the employees who apply that chemical. If they can be better protected. I'm sure you're aware of the enormous award that was made to the one person who did the golf course, for like 20, 30 years. Very sick man right now, and it has all been attributed to that chemical. So I would ask you to reconsider your safety precautions in regard to Roundup. Thank you.
Do you want to respond to that? I mean, they wear more than a pair of gloves, right?
So, as far as the lawsuit, I would hold back any editorial on that because we're not experts in the law. But my history and the history of all of our employees, as far as using pesticides, when we do choose to use them, as part of the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection training program, the highest exposure level is during the mixing of any particular chemical. And at that point, we mandate that all of our employees make sure that they read the label, make sure that they are wearing the personal protective equipment, gloves, glasses, goggles, could be an apron. And then beyond that, that is again why we have chosen voluntarily to make all of our operators go through that certification program, so they do learn that.
Very good, thank you. Committee? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Saw in a recent news report that certain fire departments proactively have taken off their shelves a certain fire suppressing foam that contains like PFAS or whatever
You
those
got
things
it,
are
yeah.
called. And not by regulation, but really through proactivity and, keeping, ahead of the curve, if you will. Anything you can tell us about efforts that, our staff does on a regular basis to ensure that we are at the cutting edge of, knowing what's going on out there, what concerns are arising, what materials or handling practices or whatever, go beyond maybe mandated regulations, but actually go the extra step to determine, hey, we see something here that, this is brand new, a brand new concern that's not really mandated, but we're going to do something about it anyways. So what might you say about our modus operandi?
So probably the best way to answer that would be to go back to our use of integrated pest management. When a decision is made to use a particular product, we have done the research in terms of what the best product is to take care of the situation or the problem that we're dealing with. But in terms of integrated pest management, a great example of that would be in our horticulture program. A few years ago, you may have seen what are called canoplants in many of our flower beds downtown. To you, they might look like decorative corn plants. We had an invasion of Japanese beetles, which we could have opted to use chemicals to take care of them. However, as an organization, we stepped back and we thought, well, it's not always about making sure that that's the right plant, and even if it was the right plant, if there's other options available. And again, that's part of what integrated pest management, if there's other plants versus why always going out and to treat something. So that is the decision we made. We took that particular plant out of our design process, if you will. We've opted to use other plants and grasses and things of that nature, and therefore we did not have to use pesticides. But when it comes down to individual products, if you will, anything that's on the market, those manufacturers obviously go through very stringent rules and regulations they have to follow. I heard someone mention about use of chemicals near waterways. I mean, anything you would use near waterways would have to be labeled to be used near waterways. So, for example, we talked about glyphosate. A trade name of glyphosate is Roundup, but there's many other manufacturers of it. There are actually vendors who have that particular product in some way, shape, or form labeled to be used safely near waterways. And again, it's not the only use, but integrated pest management, we would not just use that as the cure-all. We would use mechanical vegetation removal, and then we might come back and then use a product afterwards.
My understanding is the county has a risk manager. Would that person be watching for new developments and cautions, or is that something that your department does?
Not so much. That would be us in-house. But again, for this discussion, not to make it real broad, but we use chemicals, if you will, in many different avenues of our management. I mean, in our swimming pool program, we have probably 5, 6, 7 different chemicals we're using. And people that perform our painting operations, those are a lot of different chemicals. When I mentioned the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, when people are certified, you're certified in a specific category. There's probably 15 different categories of chemical use to be certified in. One of them, for example, would be forest pests. One would be landscape and turf. That's what most of our people are. Then there's agricultural products. People would be trained specifically in that. People that work with paints, that's a particular certification.
So DATCAP would have a record of who's certified in those areas?
That is correct.
And if DATCAP became aware that there was a newly discovered danger in chemical X, they would give you a whistle?
I can't answer that. That might be something bigger outside of their wheelhouse, if you will.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Thank you for your report. Whipping into educational items, I guess. Start with, I think we overheard a little good news from the Dog Park Special Committee, so if that wants to be Alderman Neal or Ms. Polly.
Do you want to give the update?
Well, update and a question. Our numbers prior to the update would put us at about, what was it, 87,000?
8790.
20,000.
I'm sorry,
With our 20,000 CIP?
yeah,
Oh, 68,000, yep.
68 plus the 20?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, 80, so 88 total,
88.
yes.
At what point, I mean, it was requested, we voted that we wanted that money redirected. When do we know it's just in the pot, rather than being as requested?
I've received an update from Mary Ann Grote in which you just gave back to me of where all of the ones that have been received. So far to date, for the dog park, we've received $55,509.25. So that doesn't include the 20,000 CIP that's
Right.
been moved over. The one we're waiting for, besides what the announcement you'll make in a second, is the 12,500 from the Community Foundation has not been received yet. And that's where we get the 68,000
Sure.
from.
And that's pending like a formal letter back to kind of describe the status of our, where we're at and whatnot, because they like to know it's really
Yeah.
going to happen,
Yep.
which it is. Yeah, I just want to, be sure that that $20,000 is not going to, evaporate somehow. It's like, well, we were counting on that.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming it's going to be there.
Yes, and I can follow up with Mary
Okay.
Ann, our
All right.
finance director.
So, and by way of an update, financially speaking, we, just in the last couple of days, received word that we have raised now an extra $5,500, 500 from a business owner and 5,000 from a local foundation, which that makes, what, 88 plus, puts us over 90, 93?
Yep, I have $93,480 with
Okay.
those two additions.
Of our $130,000 ultimate, bells and whistles and everything goal. So that's essentially our.
Bring on the bells and whistles. That's what I say. Any questions on the Dog Park Committee?
I haven't got an answer yet.
Okay. Ms. Polly can lead us through winter activity facility update.
Okay. Since we are in mid-January, I was asked to give an update on our outdoor recreation opportunities and where we're at. And Mr. Fricks, if I miss anything here, please add whatever you need to. It's been quite an interesting winter so far. We have snow outside, but we don't have a lot of frost underneath the snow. So it's been quite a challenge to get things open and keep them open. But our tubing hill did open on December 14th with one hill, and then we opened the second hill shortly after that. It does remain open, even despite the warmer weather. It's during the day pretty soft if it's warmer and the sun is shining. But as it cools down, it does help the hill become faster in the evening. So that's been open. I do have an update from Karen Powers, who just wanted to point out where we were numbers-wise last year to this year at Sylvan Hill, and that's due to the fact that we had snow earlier in December and could be open. But in 2018, we were at 725, this is just during the month of December, 725 youth and 1,019 adults. And this year, 2019, just the month of December, we were at 1,557 youth and 2,040 adults. So we doubled about both of the attendance from 2018 to 2019 for the month of December, and that was due to the early snow. So that was good. And the
Can I
fact-
interrupt and ask if that's typical that there are more adults than children? I wouldn't
I
have
don't know, I have
thought
to go
that.
back further. I haven't been here that long, but. 18. Oh, 14?
Oh,
sorry.
14.
Oh, 14.
Okay, well then
That's a number.
there you go. Never mind.
Thank you, Jody. That was a good question, though. Adult fees, yeah. So that's the Sylvan Hill tubing. We continue to work on it, keep it open, groom it. Our snowmaking went fairly well this year, correct?
Snowmaking went well. On pace.
All right. And then the 400 block outdoor rink is open again. It was open and then it was closed due to the warmer weather, and our staff was breaking through when they tried to groom it and clear the snow. But it is open again. I actually saw the truck out today adding a layer of water to it. So we will have that warming house open. I overheard in the office this morning that we may have opened Tom Field today, and we're working on Marathon Park. I don't know, is that correct?
Staff is working through the night tonight.
Okay.
Correct.
So our goal is to try to get those open as soon as possible, but the fact
Both
that
of
we've.
them?
Both of them, yeah. But the fact that we've had so much rain underneath the snow hasn't helped us get that base to keep the ice there.
Winter is young. It's only begun.
It has.
Very good. Good news. Any questions from the committee? Future agenda items, I'm assuming we're going to have a recommendation that we can green light on Riverside Park testing. Is there anything else that we want to consider? Mr. Nutting?
I didn't think about this until just several minutes ago, and that would be a couple of years back, and I don't know if it was under Mayor Tipples, but we, in an effort to save costs in manpower, a number of our park areas, Mr. Duncanson gave us a way to save costs by letting the turf grow, letting the grass grow wild. And various areas that was met with quite a bit of community opposition because it was just looked unkept in various parks that were more front and center. But I'm wondering if this is a potential option that we could look into as an agenda item for the future. Is this area of Riverside Park really used, and could it be an area that could be just allowed to grow wild and not be mowed, and therefore not be used, as we've done that in other areas and saving mowing costs, and is this something that could be looked into as an agenda item?
Not the worst idea in the world, really. When you think about, we're talking about delineating a problem area, and if it's shown, well, it's pretty much this little stretch over here, let that just go.
And is that area, is that where the
conceivable, sure.
pickleball area is? Is that pickleball court there, or that, or
There's
that
a bike polo.
Yeah, bike polo.
Yeah.
Bike polo?
Yep, but that is on that paved area.
Yes.
It's not on the turf.
And is this a possibility that could be considered as a capping different use area, that we just expand those paved areas, more parking, for instance? Parking's always a question down there. I know, I'm just talking off the cuff to something to put onto a future agenda.
And you're talking just the area south of the shelter, not the area north of the shelter where the playground and the field.
Well, any area that is troublesome.
Pretty much our area of
So-
focus is that south.
That's a terrible idea.
Oh.
Why don't we just put an electric fence around it, or maybe a chain link fence with razor wire on top of it so people can't get in there? I mean, that's gonna look like, Dave, that's gonna look like a tremendous cop-out.
Well, I don't know if it's an area, I'd have to visually see what is that area used for right now.
Well, I don't know. I don't think any of us know. I think it
Yeah.
must get used.
It
If
must-
not,
Years ago, it was used for volleyball. Volleyballs was played there by
And
citizens.
we're getting into an area that's
Yeah.
not on our agenda for
Right.
discussion,
Yeah.
but the only thing I would add is that if it were landscaped to prairie plants, and if the contours were sculpted in a manner, you could also use it to divert water running off the hill, if that was a concern. So I think that's worthy of consideration in the future. And our minutes will reflect kind of the steps that Citizens for Clean Wausau suggested. And so we'll have that to refer back to. And if I had a motion to adjourn, I think we could all get out of here. Mr. Gisselman moved, and we have a second from Mr. Smith. And we will bid a wonderful happy birthday to Mr. Gisselman All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion passes. Mr. Gisselman will therefore have a happy birthday.